Hello, brothers and sisters. Today, I want to talk about Ashli Babbitt. We're going to read from the Department of Justice's website their press release on their closing the investigation into the death of Ashli Babbitt. For anyone who doesn't know, Ashli Babbitt was the only person killed, I believe, as a direct result of the riots that happened on January 6th. There were a few other deaths in later days by suicide, and there were a few medical emergencies, but she was the only person actually killed. And to be fair, there were also some physical altercations where there were some assaults on both rioters and police, and people were seriously injured. And before I start this, I just want to say I think what happened on January 6th was horrible. I think to me, it was similar to the Black Lives Matter protests. It was a protest that got out of control and turned into a riot. It absolutely was a riot. And everyone there who broke the law should be prosecuted. So all of the rioters should have been prosecuted for probably at least criminal trespass, and any that committed assaults should have faced penalties, whatever the proper penalties were for those assaults. I also do want to go on record to say, and I think Trump made a mistake, Trump should not have pardoned the violent protesters. And he did. He pardoned all but I believe a handful of the very, very worst. And I think that went a little too far. But I think he was trying to send a message because the Department of Justice, the Biden administration, and the democratically controlled Congress overcharged people. People who should have just got simple criminal trespass ended up spending years in the legal system, and some of them got several years in jail. So I see that as very similar to what's happening in the UK with people going to jail and being investigated for mean tweets. I think they were overcharged. So Trump decided to send a message and pardon them all. And I think that was a mistake, but he did it. I just wanted to get that out of the way. And people may say there were other murders and such involved in the January 6th riot. And I'm calling it a riot. I'm not calling it an insurrection. And because if it was a coup, if it was an insurrection, where are all the guns? Anytime I ever hear of coups, people by force take over the government. Conservatives have a lot of guns, but they weren't there that day. And for people who say that there were other murders, please send me in the links to those murder charges. Because as I said, I believe the Democrat-controlled Congress overcharged these people. With that overcharging, if there was even the hint of a murder, somebody would have been murdered. And I don't believe you're going to find any, because what did happen was there were a few suicides, there were a few people who died of medical emergencies within the following days or weeks, but legally these don't meet the definition of murder. All right, so with that, let's talk about Ashli Babbitt. So I believe Ashli Babbitt is the only person that was actually killed on that day. And so we've got here a press release. Department of Justice closes investigation of the death of Ashli Babbitt, Wednesday, April 14th, 2021. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia will not pursue criminal charges against the U.S. Capitol Police officer involved in the fatal shooting of 35-year-old Ashli Babbitt. The investigation determined that on January 6th, Miss Babbitt joined a crowd of people that gathered on the U.S. Capitol grounds to protest the results of the 2020 election. Inside the Capitol building, a joint session of Congress convened to certify the results of the Electoral College vote was underway. Members of the crowd outside the building, which was closed to the public during the joint session, eventually forced their way into the Capitol building and past U.S. Capitol Police officers attempting to maintain order. The joint session was stopped, and the USCP, U.S. Capitol Police, began evacuating members of Congress. The investigation further determined that Miss Babbitt was among a mob of people that entered the Capitol building and gained access to a hallway outside the Speaker's lobby, which leads to the chamber of the U.S. House of Representatives. At that time, the U.S. Capitol Police was evacuating members of the chamber, which the mob was trying to enter from multiple doorways. The U.S. Capitol Police officers used furniture to barricade a set of glass doors separating the hallway and Speaker's lobby to try to stop the mob. Members of the mob attempted to break through the doors by striking them and breaking glass with their hands, flagpoles, helmets, and other objects. Eventually, the three Capitol Police officers positioned outside the doors were forced to evacuate. As members of the mob continued to strike the glass, Miss Babbitt attempted to climb through one of the doors where the glass was broken. An officer inside the speaker's lobby fired one round from his service pistol, striking Miss Babbitt in the left shoulder, causing her to fall back to the doorway and onto the floor. A Capitol Police emergency response team, which had begun making its way into the hall to try to subdue the mob, administered aid to Miss Babbitt, who was transported to Washington Hospital, where she succumbed to her injuries. The focus of the criminal investigation was to determine whether federal prosecutors could prove that the officer violated any federal laws, concentrating on the possible application of 18 U.S.C. 242, a federal criminal civil rights statute, in order to establish a violation of the statute. Prosecutors must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the officer acted willfully to provide Miss Babbitt of a right protected by the Constitution or other law. Her Fourth Amendment right not to be subjected to unreasonable seizure. Prosecutors would have to prove not only that the officer used a force that was unconstitutionally unreasonable, but that the officer did so willfully, which the Supreme Court has interpreted to mean that the officer acted with a bad purpose to disregard law. As this requirement has been interpreted by the courts, evidence that an officer acted out of fear, mistake, panic, misconception, negligence, or even poor judgment cannot establish the high level of intent required. The investigation revealed no evidence to establish beyond a reasonable doubt the officer committed a violation under 18 U.S.C. 242. Specifically, the investigation revealed no evidence to establish that at the time the officer fired a single shot at Miss Babbitt, the officer did not reasonably believe that it was necessary to do so in defense of members of Congress and others evacuating the House chamber. Acknowledging the tragic loss of life and offering condolences to Miss Babbitt's family, the U.S. Attorney's Office and Department of Justice have therefore closed the investigation. All right, so I say this is a whitewash. This officer, in my view, had no reason to shoot her. Yeah, I agree she should not have been climbing over a barrier, but she was unarmed, climbing over a barrier. She should have been arrested for trespassing, maybe some sort of breaking and entry, maybe some other law. She did not need to be shot. It's unfortunate that normally murder and manslaughter would be state crimes, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the intricacies. And so that makes it a little bit harder to prosecute under federal law. It is a higher standard to prosecute under federal law, but I believe they should have done it because I think this officer was in the wrong. At best, this was manslaughter. At worst, this was murder. This officer should not have used deadly force in this action. How many Black Lives Matter protesters burned down buildings and climbed over barriers and were not shot? How many other protesters where things have gotten out of hand have been shot? So I think that this is a travesty of justice, and I'm looking forward to the day when this officer is held accountable. I am hoping that and calling for the Trump administration to investigate this again, because I don't believe there's a statute of limitations on these crimes. And I think this officer should get his day in court. I don't believe a reasonable person can think it's okay to shoot a protester climbing over a barrier. Let's go ahead and fast forward and see what happens next. So this was in April 14, 2021. So recently, there was another story that came up, and here's Ashli Babbitt. Trump administration to settle Ashli Babbitt wrongful death lawsuit for $5 million, sources say. So it looks like her family sued the federal government for a wrongful death. I'm actually pretty happy about that because I do think it was wrongful death. So this was in CNN Politics, May 19, 2015. And I'll link all these stories in the links so you can see. So here's Ashli Babbitt, Make America Great hat. Some people think she should be shot just for wearing that hat, I'm sure. The Trump administration has agreed to pay nearly $5 million to the family of Ashli Babbitt, a pro-Donald Trump rioter who was shot and killed after breaching the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, according to a person familiar with the source. And I think that's fair. She was a rioter who was shot and killed for breaching the Capitol. I don't disagree that this happened, and I don't disagree she was a rioter. My problem is we don't generally shoot rioters unless there's no other option. The settlement, once approved by court, will end a $30 million wrongful death lawsuit filed by Babbitt's family. Prosecutors said in a hearing earlier this month that a settlement agreement had been reached, though details were not made clear at the time. The Washington Post first reported the settlement amount. As Babbitt was attempting to climb through a broken window to the Speaker's lobby outside the House of Representatives chamber during the attack, a U.S. Capitol police officer shot and killed Babbitt. The officer was cleared of any criminal wrongdoing related to the shooting. During the hearing on May 2nd, lawyers of Babbitt's estate, as well as attorneys for the Justice Department, confirmed that a settlement in principle had been reached in the case and said the agreement would cover all parameters of the suit. In April 21, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia determined that no federal laws were broken in the shooting. The Justice Department found no evidence to establish beyond a reasonable doubt that the officer willfully used unlawful or unreasonable force. Yeah, I have to disagree. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know the definition under the law of willfully or unlawful or unreasonable, but I feel that it was definitely unreasonable use of force. Specifically, the investigation revealed no evidence to establish that at the time the officer fired a single shot at Miss Babbitt, the officer did not reasonably believe that it was necessary to do so in self-defense or defense of the members of Congress and others evacuating the House chamber. The officer wrote in a statement at the time. Different legal standards, however, exist for civil suits, like the one brought by Babbitt's family and criminal charges. In a statement Monday, Capitol Police Chief Tom Manger said he was extremely disappointed and disagree with this settlement. In 21, the Department of Justice investigation determined no wrongdoing by police. This settlement sends a chilling message to law enforcement nationwide, especially those with a protective mission like ours. CNN has reached out to Babbitt's estate attorney and Justice Department for comment. Yeah, and so different standards of justice, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but I believe in America, in a criminal case, you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the facts are true and that a crime was committed. In a civil case, you only have to prove there's a preponderance of evidence. I believe that's right. And again, don't quote me on that. I'm not a lawyer. But it's a lower standard, so it is actually easier to prove a civil case. And then there's even more news. The reason I'm bringing this up was there was a new development this week. And this is in the Washington Times. And again, I'll link all these here. Air Force reverses Biden administration and grants military funeral with honors to January 6th protester. Yeah, so little known fact, if I remember right, Ashli Babbitt was in the U.S. Air Force and was in security services, which used to be the security police when my dad was in the security police. I think she was in E4, so I think that's a senior airman, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong on that. But she got out, I believe, after 13 years in the Air Force, so she was a 13-year Air Force veteran at the time. And she'd been separated from the Air Force for a few years before she was shot. It appears, and I did not know this, that her family requested a military funeral for her. And I don't know all the details of what that entails, but I'm guessing, given this story, that it's normal for veterans to be able to request a military funeral and they get some sort of military honors there. So if anyone knows, please feel free to tell me in the comments what that means. I haven't looked that up. The Air Force will extend full military funeral honors to Ashli Babbitt, a 35-year-old Air Force and National Guard veteran who was fatally shot by Capitol police officers during the January 6th Capitol riot, according to Judicial Watch. Undersecretary of the Air Force Matthew L. Lohmeyer confirmed the decision to grant her the funeral honors in an August 15th letter to her husband and mother, the legal advocacy group said Wednesday in a statement. After viewing the circumstances of Ashli's death and considering the information that has come forward since then, I am persuaded that the previous determination was incorrect, Mr. Lohmeyer said. So it looks like he's overruled the previous general or the previous secretary of the Air Force. Police accused her of trying to climb through a shattered window beside a barricade door into the speaker's lobby. See, there was no accused. She did it. I'm certain. I think I've even seen video. I think there's video out there that's been released of her climbing through the window and over the barricade. So she definitely did that. Capitol Police Lieutenant Michael Byrd then opened fire, striking Babbitt in the left shoulder. She was taken to MedStar our Washington Hospital Center where she died. Yeah, I hope Capitol Police Lieutenant Michael Byrd is eventually brought up on charges for murdering Ashli Babbitt, 100%. Babbitt was the only official homicide on January 6th. She was denied military funerals because of her actions at the U.S. Capitol. Ashli, age 35, was unarmed when she was fatally shot. She stood 5'3" tall and weighed 115 pounds. Her hands were up in the air, empty and in plain view of Lieutenant Michael Byrd, the four armed officers behind him, according to the letter that Judicial Watch attorney sent to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. In April 21, the Justice Department during the Biden administration declined to pursue criminal charges against the officer. He was also cleared by Metropolitan Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. Yeah, so the other way you could bring charges against him is if the U.S. Capitol Police chose to take that to the local prosecutor for Washington, D.C., but I'm sure the prosecutor would decline to do charges because, again, it's a liberal stronghold. They're going to say that this was right. Based on the investigation, officials determined that there is insufficient evidence to support a criminal prosecution. The Justice Department said in a statement then, the decision to reverse the Biden administration's denial of military honors for Babbitt comes in the wake of a $5 million settlement for her family for wrongful death and other claims against the government. Judicial Watch's team spent years investigating, litigating, exposing the truth about Ashli's homicide. Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton said in a statement, Judicial Watch is proud to have done its part in bringing her family a measure of justice and accountability for Ashli's outrageous killing. So there we go. We're getting some justice for Ashli. Again, I won't be satisfied until the police lieutenant faces a criminal court. And I'm glad that her family is getting some relief in the settlement, where $5 million settlement, allegedly. I don't think it's been completed yet. And then lastly, she's getting military honors. I'm glad to see it because I don't think she should have been killed. All right, that's what I think. Hey, if you like this, like and subscribe. If you don't like it, don't watch me. Thanks, bye.